Think about a hidden engine.
Mm-hmm.
It just runs silently in the background of our lives, quietly steering the choices we make, the relationships we build, and, the futures we imagine.
Yeah.
That engine is our relationship with money. So what actually happens to us when money is involved?
Well, it really acts as like a profound magnifying glass.
Right.
Because when you look at the underlying mechanics of human behavior, you start to realize that what we label as financial decisions, they're very rarely about numbers.
Yeah, they're not just spreadsheets.
Exactly. They're emotional responses. They're survival mechanisms. I mean, they're really reflections of our deepest anxieties and our most quiet hopes.
That is honestly the perfect place to begin our deep dive today.
Mm.
We're gently exploring the invisible forces that dictate how we interact with the world through the lens of finance.
It's such a fascinating space to be in.
It really is. And we've gathered some truly amazing perspectives for this exploration. We're drawing from behavioral economics, the Meta Foundation's research on quality of life, the habit formation frameworks from James Clear.
Oh, those are great.
Yeah, and of course, the remarkable insights woven through Morgan Housel's work, The Psychology of Money.
And we should probably establish our mission clearly from the outset here.
Definitely.
We are not here to offer stock tips. We are not going to analyze index funds or, dissect tax strategies.
No spreadsheets today?
Right. No spreadsheets. The goal here is entirely observational. We want to step back and look at the psychological barriers that keep us from contentment.
Yeah.
We want to explore why our minds, which are otherwise, so brilliant at keeping us alive, so frequently seem to work in direct opposition to our wallets.
And to everyone listening, think of this as a calm, safe space.
Absolutely. Zero judgment.
Zero judgment here. Whether you are someone who, obsessively tracks every penny.
Which is a lot of people.
It is. Or if you're someone who breaks out in a cold sweat just looking at a bank statement. You are simply displaying the very human, sometimes totally baffling ways we all navigate this incredibly complex system.
Mm-hmm. We all have blind spots.
We really do. We all do things that look irrational from the outside.
It helps to start by looking at the specific operating system that each individual is running.
Operating system, I like that.
Yeah, because we tend to walk through life assuming that everyone else processes risk and reward and security through the exact same neurological lens that we do.
Right, we assume everyone sees the world like we do.
But behavioral economics proves that is a complete illusion. Every single person is running on proprietary software, and it's coded by their unique past.
Oh, wow.
Morgan Housel frames this beautifully with a really simple, liberating concept. He just says, no one is crazy.
No one is crazy.
Right. People do things with money that look absolutely unhinged to a bystander. But in the specific moment that decision is made, it makes perfect, coherent sense to them based on their internal model of the world.
So let's expand on that operating system metaphor for a second.
Yeah.
Because if you think about early childhood experiences or young adulthood as the legacy code written into our brains, it explains so much about why our modern financial decisions sometimes just crash.
Yeah, exactly.
You might be using a modern app, right? Like a mobile brokerage account or a high-limit credit card. But you were running it on legacy code that was written during a period of scarcity or even trauma decades ago.
And that legacy code is deeply, deeply embedded.
How deep are we talking?
Well, to understand how powerful it is, we can look at a landmark study conducted by the National Bureau of Economic Research.
Okay.
Economists Ulrich Malmendier and Stefan Nagel analyzed 50 years of data from the Survey of Consumer Finances. They wanted to know what actually dictates the amount of risk a person is willing to take with their investments over the course of their life.
What did they find?
What they discovered is that people's lifetime financial decisions are heavily anchored to the macroeconomic experiences of their specific generation, particularly the events that occurred during their formative, early adult years.
Meaning the state of the world when you were in your late teens and 20s essentially hardwires your baseline for financial anxiety.
Precisely.
So if you came of age in the late 1970s, you experienced inflation approaching, 15%?
Yeah, almost 15%.
You watched the purchasing power of a dollar melt like an ice cube on a summer sidewalk. That doesn't just annoy you, I imagine?
No, it biologically trains your amygdala. It trains you to view cash as inherently dangerous and unstable.
Wow. And the biological training is probably incredibly difficult to overwrite.
Very difficult. Now, contrast that with someone born in 1970, during their formative teens and 20s, so the 80s and 90s, the S&P 500 increased almost tenfold. adjusted for inflation.
Tenfold. That's
Yeah.
massive.
Right. So their legacy code tells them the stock market is a magical engine of explosive, life-changing growth.
But if you were born in 1950...
If you were born in 1950, the market went virtually nowhere, adjusted for inflation, during those exact same formative decades.
Oh, I see.
So those two groups of people are going to walk through the rest of their lives with completely opposed, hardwired beliefs.
About whether the stock market is a reliable vehicle for wealth or just a dangerous rigged casino.
Exactly. And neither group is crazy. They are just applying the survival lessons dictated by their lived reality.
I often think about our personal financial experiences as looking through a tiny keyhole.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah, your personal lived experience makes up perhaps 0.0000001% of what has actually happened in the complex history of the global economy.
Basically nothing.
Basically nothing, yet it makes up 80% of how you think the world works. But let me push back on this idea of internal logic for a second.
Sure.
If everyone is just living by their own internal code and doing whatever makes sense to them in the moment, does that mean all financial decisions are equally valid? Or are we just incredibly good at inventing rationalizations for terrible math?
Well, that exact tension between math and emotion is where the real work of behavioral finance happens.
Okay.
The math is frequently invalid. A spreadsheet will tell you a decision is objectively destructive, but the emotion driving the decision is always justified to the person making it.
Right.
This is where we encounter money scripts. These are the unconscious, silent narratives we internalize in childhood. They're heavily shaped by observing how our parents earned, spent, hoarded, or argued about money.
That makes a lot of sense. So if you grew up in a household where money was a constant source of terror and scarcity,
You might develop a script that makes you extremely frugal. You're terrified to spend a dime, even when you have plenty.
or interestingly, you might swing to the absolute opposite extreme.
Oh, absolutely.
You see people who grow up in poverty, land a decent paying job, and immediately spend wildly. The spreadsheet says they are destroying their future, but the money script, that invisible legacy code, is shouting, finally, we get to enjoy life.
Finally, I am safe enough to have things.
Yes. The spending isn't a mathematical calculation. It is an unconscious emotional bomb.
And that emotional bomb can take forms that society heavily stigmatizes.
Like what?
Consider the phenomenon of lottery tickets. The data shows that the lowest income households in the United States spend an average of $400 a year on lottery tickets.
$400 a year.
Simultaneously, roughly 40% of Americans cannot comfortably come up with $400 to cover an emergency.
That is staggering.
It is. Now, to an outsider, someone who perhaps grew up with stable finances and a clear path to college, this looks like sheer madness. Blowing your only potential safety net on a 1 in a million statistical impossibility seems entirely irrational.
But if we force ourselves to look through that person's keyhole,
When you look through their keyhole, you see a completely different landscape. You see an individual who may feel, quite justifiably, that the traditional avenues to wealth building are structurally closed off to them.
they might not have access to a booming stock portfolio or a high-paying corporate ladder.
Or generational real estate. To the buyer in that scenario, the lottery ticket is not a bad investment strategy. It is the purchase of a tangible dream.
Wow.
For a few dollars, they get to hold the possibility of a fundamentally different life in their hands for a few days. The math is undeniably flawed, but the human desire for hope, the need to feel that a better future is at least possible, is universally valid.
It really emphasizes how finance is not a hard science. We teach it like it's physics or mathematics, where there are strict laws and predictable outcomes.
But it's actually a soft skill. It's a behavioral art.
There is a brilliant contrast in the source material that illustrates this perfectly, involving two men, Richard Fuscone and Ronald Reed.
That contrast might be the single best distillation of why intelligence does not equate to financial peace.
Tell me about Fuscone first.
Richard Fuscone was the epitome of a hard science success story. He was a highly educated executive, a Harvard graduate, had a remarkably successful, lucrative career in high finance. He understood the complex mechanics of money better than almost anyone on the planet.
So he had all the tools.
All of them. Yet, he borrowed heavily to expand an 18,000 square foot mansion, heavily overleveraged his assets, and when the 2008 financial crisis struck, he lost everything. He went bankrupt.
Then you look at Ronald Reed.
Right.
Ronald Reed was the first person in his entire family to simply graduate high school. He spent his life working as a janitor and a gas station attendant in rural Vermont. No Ivy League degree, no Wall Street pedigree, no six-figure bonuses.
None of that.
But when he passed away, he left behind an estate worth $8 million, the bulk of which he donated to his local hospital and library.
So how does a janitor outperform a Harvard-educated finance executive?
That's the question.
Because Ronald Read had mastered the soft skills. He possessed a quiet, enduring patience. He consistently lived below his means, he avoided debt, and he steadily bought blue-chip stocks and simply left them alone for decades.
He allowed compounding to work quietly in the background.
Fuscone had the technical intelligence, but lacked the behavioral discipline. Reed lacked the technical pedigree, but had flawless behavioral software.
It proves that doing well with money has a little to do with how smart you are, and a whole lot to do with how you behave.
Exactly.
But if our internal operating systems are so crucial, we have to look at the environment we are plugging those systems into, because modern society seems perfectly engineered to exploit our behavioral blind spots.
Oh, without a doubt.
If our brains are so wired for survival and safety, why does getting a bigger paycheck usually just mean getting a bigger credit card bill?
Right.
We get a raise, and suddenly we're running faster just to stay in the exact same place.
We are talking about the treadmill of more. And it is a treadmill that is uniquely calibrated to match your speed no matter how fast you run.
Which brings us to the profound paradox of rising incomes.
Logic would dictate that if an individual's income doubles from $50,000 to $100,000, their savings rate should explode.
Because their basic survival needs were already met at 50,000.
Exactly. So the excess should naturally be stored away. But the data reveals a different reality. A massive percentage of people in those rising income brackets struggle to save anything at all.
Why is that?
Because their spending on non-essentials effortlessly jumps by 30 to 40% right alongside their new salary.
Lifestyle inflation. It is the silent, invisible killer of wealth.
It really is.
We don't even notice it happening. It's just an extra streaming service here, upgrading from a Honda to a Lexus there, suddenly flying premium economy instead of basic.
And this touches on a critical psychological distinction highlighted by the Meta Foundation's research. It's the severe conflation of our standard of living with our quality of life.
We use those terms interchangeably, don't we?
We do, but they're entirely different concepts. Standard of living is strictly external, it is measurable and visible.
Like the square footage of your house.
Right. The thread count of your sheets, the badge on the hood of your car, the price tag on your watch. Quality of life, conversely, is an entirely internal experience.
It is the subjective peace you feel when your head hits the pillow.
Yes. It is the autonomy you have over your Tuesday afternoon. It is the depth and security of your relationships.
It's the difference between spending money to upgrade the size of your cage versus spending money to buy the key that actually opens the door.
That is a very precise way to visualize it. And our entire cultural narrative, driven by advertising, social media, economic pressure, it relentlessly pushes us to focus solely on the standard of living.
Constantly.
This dynamic is explored in The Millionaire Next Door through something called the better off theory. It posits that individuals who grow up in lower income or financially stressed households and who subsequently land high-income careers often harbor a deep, unconscious psychological need.
The need to prove something.
A need to prove to the world and to themselves that they are definitively better off than their parents were.
So the legacy code of their childhood scarcity demands visible proof of their adult success.
Yes. The text uses a hypothetical archetype named Teddy Friend.
Okay, Teddy Friend.
Teddy grows up with very little, constantly observing the wealthier kids at school, internalizing their visible markers of success. When Teddy eventually secures a high-paying job, the legacy code activates.
He immediately purchases the massive suburban house, the imported luxury vehicles, the exclusive club memberships.
Exactly. To anyone observing him, his standard of living broadcasts massive, undeniable success. But his quality of life is actually in a state of quiet crisis.
How so?
He is swimming in high-interest debt, incredibly fragile to any economic downturn, and working exhausting hours just to maintain the illusion he has constructed.
This mechanism of using possessions to communicate with strangers brings up one of the most fascinating anecdotes from Morgan Houssel's work. He calls it the man in the car paradox.
Oh, that's a brilliant one.
He talks about his time working as a valet at a high-end hotel in Los Angeles. He would constantly see people rolling up in $250,000 Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Porsches. And he realized something incredibly profound about human nature. When a Ferrari drives past you on the street, You almost never look at the driver and think, wow, that specific person is so cool, smart, and successful. I admire them.
No, you don't care about the driver at all.
Exactly. You ignore the driver entirely. Instead, you project yourself into the driver's seat.
Right.
You think, if I were driving that Ferrari, people would think I was cool and successful. It's a complete paradox. The driver bought the car explicitly to be admired by the pedestrians, but the pedestrians are bypassing the driver entirely, using the driver's wealth merely as a benchmark for their own fantasies of being admired.
It is a devastating psychological trap. We could call it the implied wealth delusion.
Implied wealth delusion.
We spend lavishly to signal our status to the tribe, believing it will bring us respect and admiration. But the very act of spending that money is what drains our actual resources, making us financially fragile.
We are literally giving away our money to show people how much money we used to have.
It is the fastest, most efficient way to have less wealth.
Which forces us to define what wealth actually is versus what it means to just be rich. We conflate those two words just as badly as we do standard of living and quality of life.
The distinction is vital. Being rich is a measure of current income. It is highly visible. If someone is driving a $200,000 car, the only thing you know for absolute certain about their finances is that they have $200,000 less than they did before they bought the car, or they are carrying a massive amount of debt.
Right. You can see when someone is rich.
But wealth is fundamentally invisible. Wealth is the money that is not spent. It is the luxury cars not purchased, the first-class upgrades declined, the jewelry left in the store.
Wealth is the unspent assets quietly compounding in a brokerage account.
Yes. Wealth is the gap between what you earn and what you allow your ego to spend.
But remaining wealthy is so incredibly difficult because modern capitalism is, at its core, a masterclass in generating envy. It thrives on comparison culture, and social media just pours aviation fuel on that fire.
It really does.
Think about the biological trap here. As you get a raise, you move to a nicer neighborhood, you naturally shift into a wealthier social circle. Suddenly, your new neighbors are driving nicer cars and taking more extravagant vacations.
And biology kicks in through a mechanism known as hedonic adaptation.
Hedonic adaptation.
Evolutionarily, humans are designed to adapt to their baseline surroundings very quickly. If our ancient ancestors were constantly overwhelmed by a new, safer cage, they wouldn't stay alert to predators. We are wired to normalize our circumstances to survive.
So in the modern world?
In the modern world, this means that the new luxury car or the bigger house feels magical for about a month. It spikes your dopamine. But very quickly, your brain normalizes it. It just becomes the car you commute in and the house you clean.
Your baseline level of happiness returns to exactly where it was before the purchase. But your baseline for spending is permanently ratcheted up.
You need a bigger hit of consumption to get the same dopamine spike next time.
So if this treadmill is biological and our environment is exploiting it, how do we actually find the off switch?
That's the challenge.
If we don't figure out how to stop the treadmill, it seems like we just run until we collapse from exhaustion or debt. This leads us directly to the psychology of enough and the incredibly dangerous trap of the moving goalpost.
Getting the goalpost to stop moving is arguably the hardest financial skill in the world. And the consequences of failing to define enough can be genuinely catastrophic, even for the most successful people on Earth.
Like who?
Look at the historical examples of Rajat Gupta or Bernie Madoff. These were men who possessed unimaginable levels of wealth. They had hundreds of millions of dollars, absolute prestige, power, the respect of their peers.
They had secured everything any human being could ever reasonably need or want.
And yet, they engaged in reckless criminal behavior. They risked their freedom, destroyed their legacies, ruined lives. Why?
Because there's no internal mechanism to tell them to stop. They just wanted more.
When your expectations for your life rise faster than your actual financial results, there is no logic in striving for more because you will always feel like you are falling behind. You take on increasingly absurd amounts of risk to catch up to a horizon that constantly recedes as you approach it.
Madoff and Gupta are extreme criminal manifestations of this. But everyday people experience the exact same psychology through what researchers call the big stretch.
The big stretch. Let's look at the data on that.
Let's look at the post-war United States consumer. Today, the median new American single-family home is roughly 50% larger than it was in the 1970s.
50%?
50%.
Huh.
And that is despite the fact that median wages, when adjusted for inflation, have remained relatively flat for large portions of the middle class over that exact same multi-decade period. how is it mathematically possible that we are buying 50% more house with the same historical purchasing power?
We are achieving it by culturally substituting debt for income. What is happening is an inflation of aspirations. Through the pervasive nature of television, the internet, and social media, the daily lifestyles of the top 1% of earners are constantly broadcast into the homes of the median earners.
So the median earner sees the sprawling kitchens, the imported appliances, the pristine aesthetics.
And they stretch themselves to mimic it. To maintain this illusion of proximity to the wealthy, we take on massive 30-year mortgages, layer on auto loans, carry rolling credit card balances.
We mortgage our future autonomy to buy present-day visible status.
It is the absolute antithesis of historical wisdom. The Meta Foundation research brings up a powerful counter-narrative from ancient Indian philosophy, the concept of santosha.
Santosha, what does that mean?
It translates roughly to deep, unshakable inner contentment. It is the active, daily practice of finding profound joy in what is currently present, rather than constantly striving and agonizing over what is absent.
It stands in direct opposition to our modern, GDP-driven metrics of success, which require endless, accelerating consumption just to keep the economy from collapsing.
Santosha forces us to ask, at what point does acquiring more stuff actually begin to degrade our quality of life?
But let me challenge that philosophy for a second.
Please do.
Because when I hear words like contentment and enough, a part of my modern brain panics. Doesn't settling for enough fundamentally kill human ambition?
I hear that a lot.
If I just practice Santosha, stop wanting a promotion, stop wanting to grow my business, am I not just giving up on my potential? Is enough just a polite psychological wrapper for mediocrity and resignation?
That is the natural, culturally ingrained fear, but it represents a deep misunderstanding of what enough actually means in practice. Enough is not about deprivation. It's not about taking a vow of poverty or suppressing your natural drive to create and build.
Okay, so what is it?
It is the realization and acceptance of a core economic and biological principle: diminishing marginal utility.
Meaning, the first slice of pizza you eat when you're starving is a transcendent, life-altering experience.
Exactly.
The second slice is very good. By the time you force down the sixth slice, you actively feel sick. The utility of the pizza plummets with every additional unit.
Precisely. Beyond a certain threshold of security and comfort, every additional dollar spent on your standard of living adds exponentially less happiness than the dollar before it.
Right.
Finding your personal definition of enough is simply recognizing where that curve flattens out for you. It's having the self-awareness to say, upgrading from a perfectly fine Toyota to a BMW will cost me $40,000, but it will not tangibly improve my Tuesday morning commute after the first 3 weeks.
And more importantly, defining enough is a defensive posture.
Mm-hmm.
It is about protecting your independence.
So how do you actually calculate that? How do you operationalize enough?
Yeah, how do you...
You operationalize it by consciously calculating the gap between your ego and your income. As your income grows, your ego will naturally demand that you spend that new money to signal your elevated status.
Of course.
Saving money is, at its core, the act of extending the gap between what you earn and what you spend to show off to other people. Humility is the actual engine of wealth.
Humility.
When you define enough, you stop bleeding your finite resources to impress strangers at stoplights, and you start storing those resources to buy your own future freedom.
Okay, so logically, we know we should save. We understand the math of compounding. We know we need to step off the treadmill of comparison, and we know we need to define our own threshold of enough. Yeah. So why don't we...
It's the million-dollar question.
Why is it so incredibly physically difficult to actually take the money from checking and put it into savings?
How are you?
It turns out we fail because we're essentially being asked to hand our money over to a total stranger, our own future self.
This is where the neurology of financial planning becomes truly revelatory. Hal Hirschfield, a prominent researcher at UCLA, has conducted fascinating studies using functional MRI machines to look at how the human brain processes time and identity.
What did he find?
He found that when you ask a person to think about themselves in the present moment, a specific region of the brain lights up. But when you ask that same person to imagine themselves 30 years in the future, that neural activity shifts entirely.
Shifts where?
Neurologically speaking, when you picture your future self, your brain uses the exact same pathways it uses when you think about a famous actor you've never met or a distant acquaintance. To your brain, your future self does not feel like you.
Right, which explains everything about why saving is so painful.
Right.
If my brain fundamentally does not believe that the 80-year-old version of me is actually me, then putting money into a retirement account doesn't feel like securing my own future. It feels like taking my hard-earned, highly useful money today and just giving it away to some random old person I don't even know.
Exactly. You are asking an evolutionary organism to sacrifice present-day calories for a stream it will never meet.
That's wild.
And this biological hurdle is compounded by a psychological phenomenon that Daniel Gilbert calls the end of history illusion.
The end of history illusion.
We have this profound, arrogant tendency to believe that the person we are right now, in this exact moment, is the finished product. We readily acknowledge that our past selves were foolish. We look back at who we were 10 years ago and cringe at our tastes and beliefs.
Oh, definitely.
We know we changed a lot in the past, yet we deeply underestimate how much we will continue to change in the future. We think the history of our personal evolution has finally reached its endpoint today.
There's a brilliant example of this illusion. Think about a 5-year-old boy. Every 5-year-old is absolutely convinced he wants to be a tractor driver when he grows up.
Naturally.
But then he turns 15, realizes tractors are slow, and decides he wants to be a high-powered corporate lawyer. The irony is, when he is 15, he thinks his life plan is completely locked in.
He has no concept that he is going to change his mind again at 30 and want to be a teacher.
And then change his mind again at 45 and 50. We are constantly evolving works in progress, but we plan as if we are set in stone.
And this combination, viewing the future self as a stranger and believing our current desires are permanent, leads directly to hyperbolic discounting.
What's that?
This is our tendency to irrationally value immediate small rewards over massive long-term rewards. We discount the future heavily because the future is an abstract stranger, while the present is vivid, demanding, and highly emotional.
It makes traditional financial planning look almost absurd. Sitting down at age 25 and mapping out exactly how much money you will need to spend every month when you are 70 is like packing a suitcase for a massive vacation, but you don't know what continent you are going to, you don't know what the weather will be, and you don't even know the personality of the person you are traveling with.
That's a perfect analogy.
So if we are constantly evolving and our desires, health, and circumstances are constantly shifting, how can we possibly plan for decades in the future without eventually feeling trapped in a cage built by our past decisions?
The solution is to abandon the idea of perfect prediction and embrace the concept of room for error. Sometimes this is called a margin of safety.
Okay.
Consider the strategy of professional blackjack card counters in Las Vegas. They do not have a crystal ball. They do not know with absolute certainty what card the dealer is going to draw next. They cannot predict the future.
Right.
What they do is count cards to understand the underlying odds of the game, and then they carefully size their bets with a massive built-in margin of safety. They know that sometimes, despite having the odds in their favor, the dealer will draw a 21 and they will lose. The margin of safety ensures that when the unpredictable happens, they don't get wiped out. They survive to play the next hand.
So how do we translate the logic of a Vegas card counter into our daily financial lives?
By adopting a barbell strategy for your money and your life.
A barbell strategy.
On one end of the barbell, you are aggressive and optimistic. You push for career growth, you invest in equities, you take calculated risks. But on the other end of the barbell, you are fiercely protective, almost paranoid. You maintain a high savings rate, you carry zero toxic debt, and you hold a robust cash emergency fund.
So you're balancing the extremes.
Exactly. The key insight here is that survival is the most critical component of compounding. You do not need a specific, perfectly articulated goal to justify saving. You don't need to know exactly what the money is for. You should save simply to hedge against life's inevitable, unpredictable surprises.
You are buying yourself a buffer against your own future changes in mind and the world's inevitable chaos. You are buying room for error.
Yes.
If rigid, long-term goals are fundamentally fragile because we are constantly evolving, then we clearly need a different architecture for managing our daily lives. We cannot rely on a 30-year spreadsheet. We have to replace goals with systems.
This is a monumental shift in how we approach progress. James Clear, whose frameworks on habit formation are essential here, articulates a brilliant distinction. He notes that goals are excellent for planning progress, but systems are what actually make progress.
Interesting.
The purpose of setting a goal is to win a specific game. But the purpose of building a system is to ensure you can continue playing the game indefinitely.
That perfectly aligns with a quote from financial planner Carl Richards, who noted, "Financial plans are worthless, but the process of financial planning is vital. The document itself will be outdated the moment inflation ticks up or you have a child, but the system of evaluating your life remains intact."
And we can layer on Scott Adams' definition to make it even more practical. He defines a system as something you do on a regular habitual basis that increases your overall odds of happiness in the long run.
Like brushing your teeth.
Exactly. If you do it every single day or every time you get paid, it's a system. If you are waiting to achieve a specific number on a specific date in the future, it's a goal. Goals create a binary state of failure until you succeed. Systems create continuous, daily victories.
Here's where the psychology of systems gets incredibly interesting. If we rely on daily systems, we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be coldly mathematically optimized. We just have to be consistent. This reminds me of the bizarre medical history of Dr. Julius Wagner-Jaureg.
Oh boy.
He was a 19th century psychiatrist working with patients suffering from late-stage syphilis, which was a death sentence at the time. He observed that some syphilis patients occasionally saw their neurological symptoms temporarily improve if they happened to contract a severe fever from another illness.
Okay, I see where this is going.
So what did Dr. Wagner-Jaureg do? He started intentionally injecting his syphilis patients with strains of malaria to induce a massive fever, hoping to burn out the syphilis.
It is an astonishing, terrifying piece of medical history.
It's wild. But think about the logic. In a very cold, purely mathematical sense, it was rational. High temperatures kill the syphilis bacteria. The math worked. But it was absolutely not reasonable. You're intentionally giving suffering people malaria. The cure could easily kill them faster than the disease. And this distinction applies directly to how we manage our finances. Aiming to be mostly reasonable works infinitely better in the long run than trying to be coldly rational.
That makes total sense.
A coldly rational, mathematically optimized financial plan might dictate that you leverage your house to the absolute hilt, take out margin loans, and invest every single penny in a perfectly diversified, high-risk portfolio. Because statistically, over 50 years, that yields the highest return.
But that completely ignores the human element. A reasonable plan recognizes that you are a biological organism that needs to sleep at night. If a mathematically perfect portfolio makes you so anxious that you sell everything during the first market correction, the math is useless. A reasonable system is one that accounts for your emotional limitations. It is a system you can actually stick with for decades.
What does a reasonable system look like in the real world?
Building systematic wealth is about removing the friction of willpower. It means automating your financial life. Your savings and investments should automatically transfer out of your checking account the very morning your paycheck hits, before your brain even registers that the money is available to spend.
Set it and forget it.
Yes. It means adopting behavioral hacks like the one more rule. Commit to saving just $1 more today than you did yesterday. It means habit stacking, linking a new financial habit like reviewing your spending to an existing ingrained routine like drinking your Sunday morning coffee.
But we have to warn people about what happens once you successfully implement these systems. You enter a phase that is often called the boring middle.
The boring middle.
That sounds like the part of a movie where everyone gets up to get popcorn.
It is exactly that. And it is the most dangerous phase of wealth building. In the beginning, paying off debt or saving your first $10,000 is thrilling. You see massive percentage changes.
Right, the dopamine is flowing.
But once your systems are automated, once the debt is gone, the emergency fund is full, and your index funds are just slowly, quietly ticking up and down with the global market, the day-to-day progress becomes virtually invisible.
The dopamine hits fade away. The thrill of financial optimization is gone, and profound boredom sets in. The danger arises when that deep boredom collides with inevitable market volatility. The market takes a 20% dip. You are already bored with your automated system, and suddenly you feel this overwhelming biological urge to do something. You want to tinker. You want to sell the index funds and buy individual tech stocks. You want to pivot into crypto or real estate. Because doing something feels like taking control, whereas doing nothing feels like being a victim.
But doing something in the middle of a compounding cycle usually just means interrupting the math. The solution to surviving the boring middle is to intentionally zoom out. You have to actively stop checking your brokerage and retirement accounts on a daily or weekly basis.
Move to checking them quarterly or even annually.
You have to trust the architecture of the reasonable system you built. Consider the ultimate example of this, Warren Buffett. He is universally recognized as the greatest investor of the modern era. We study his stock picks endlessly. But the most vital data point about Buffett, as highlighted in the sources, is that roughly 97% of his immense multi-billion-dollar net worth was accumulated after his 65th birthday.
That statistic is always staggering to hear.
It reframes everything. His secret weapon isn't just an unparalleled ability to analyze corporate balance sheets. His true secret is that he started investing when he was 10 years old, and he simply never stopped. He let the system run for 3/4 of a century. He survived the boring middle by not interrupting the compounding process with unnecessary action.
Okay, let's step back and look at the whole board.
Right.
Let's say we successfully implement everything we've discussed. We do the hard, internal work to recognize and rewrite our childhood money scripts. We step off the exhausting treadmill of standard of living inflation. We define our personal threshold of enough. We build reasonable automated systems, and we manage our psychology well enough to survive the boring middle without sabotaging ourselves. If we do all of that, what is the ultimate prize? What does all this quiet, invisible wealth actually buy us?
It buys you the single most valuable, non-renewable currency in the universe: time.
Time.
Morgan Housel's core unifying thesis in the psychology of money is that controlling your time is the highest possible dividend that money pays. The highest form of wealth, the absolute pinnacle of financial success, is simply the ability to wake up every single morning and say, I can do whatever I want today with whoever I want for as long as I want.
That is a profound redefinition of wealth. It moves wealth away from being a collection of tangible objects, cars, houses, watches, and defines it entirely as a state of autonomy.
And this isn't just a philosophical musing. It is backed by decades of psychological data. Angus Campbell, a psychologist at the University of Michigan, conducted a massive, definitive research study in 1981 on human happiness.
What was he looking for?
He wanted to know what actually makes people feel good about their lives. He looked at demographics, income, education, geography. What he found was that having a strong internal sense of controlling one's own life is a more dependable predictor of positive feelings of well-being than any objective condition of life.
Meaning, autonomy matters more to your daily happiness than the size of your salary, the square footage of your house, or the prestige of your job title.
Autonomy is the ultimate metric. This represents a transition into what we can call a post-affluence philosophy. Once your baseline essential needs are met: housing, food, healthcare, basic security, the goal of your life should not be to keep adding more complexity, more debt, and more stuff to manage.
The goal should be to stabilize your desires and begin to savor your time. To stop constantly asking the exhausting question of what's next and finally start asking what is enough.
There is a story from the source material about the entrepreneur Derek Sivers that illustrates this beautifully.
I love this story.
When Sivers was 22 years old, he got a very basic day job paying $20,000 a year. Instead of inflating his lifestyle, he lived incredibly frugally. He spent only $1,000 a month. Over 2 years, he managed to save $12,000.
Which was a lot of money for him.
Once he hit that $12,000 mark, he quit his day job to become a full-time independent musician. He said that at age 24, with 12 grand in the bank, he was completely free. Years later, he built and sold a company for millions and millions of dollars. But when a friend asked him how that massive windfall changed his life, Sivers pointed out that it didn't make a fundamental difference to his daily happiness. The real difference, the actual acquisition of freedom, happened when he was 22 years old and saved that first $12,000. Because that initial $12,000 bought his autonomy. It bought him the ability to dictate his own schedule. If we look at the structural stages of financial independence, many people reach stage 3, which we can call the momentum phase. Their savings are growing, the compounding is visible, and the spreadsheets look fantastic. But stage 3 carries a massive risk of psychological burnout because the individual is still entirely focused on financial optimization. They are still obsessed with the numbers. The true goal is to transition into stage 4, where the focus shifts entirely away from the money. What does life actually look like when you cross into stage 4?
Well, in stage 4, your financial system is completely on autopilot. It no longer requires your daily mental energy. So you redirect all of that newly freed cognitive bandwidth away from optimizing your portfolio and toward optimizing your actual lived experience.
You begin to heavily invest your time in health span, in longevity, in getting 8 hours of sleep, and in deepening your relationships.
As the source text provocatively asks, What is the use of achieving financial independence if you completely destroy your physical and mental health in the process?
Exactly. In stage 4, money is finally revealed for what it truly is. It is not a tool to buy things. It is a tool to buy options. It is a tool to buy flexibility. It's the tool that allows you to permanently step off the materialist treadmill.
So as we bring all of these different threads together, from the neurobiology of how we view our future selves, to the legacy code of our childhoods, to the illusion of the man in the Ferrari, we return to our core idea. Money is merely a magnifying glass.
It exposes our deep evolutionary fears, our need for tribal status, our unhealed past traumas, and our quietest desires for safety.
True wealth is never going to be found in what we consume, in the designer labels we wear, or the luxury cars we drive to signal our success to strangers. True wealth is found entirely in the autonomy we build and the calm, quiet systems we create to protect our finite time on this earth.
It requires the ultimate shift in human perspective. You have to move away from seeing your money as a visible scorecard for your success and begin seeing it instead as an invisible shield for your independence.
And that leaves us with one final thought for you to ponder today as you go about your life. We talked extensively about money scripts, those unconscious habits, anxieties, and hidden logics we inherited from our parents' struggles and triumphs. If wealth is truly what you don't see, then perhaps the most valuable inheritance you can possibly pass down to the next generation isn't a massive trust fund.
It isn't a paid-off estate or a perfectly optimized stock portfolio.
Perhaps the greatest intergenerational wealth you can leave behind is your own financial peace of mind. It is doing the hard, internal psychological work today to break the cycle of the treadmill so that you can pass down a quiet, invisible relationship with money that is rooted entirely in freedom rather than fear.
Thank you so much for exploring these ideas with us on this deep dive.
We appreciate you spending your incredibly valuable time with us. Until next time.